I'm Rebecca, 32 years old, and I've spent my entire life trying to prove myself to my mother. No matter what I achieved, Diana always found a way to minimize it. When Dad's 65th birthday approached, she called to remind me not to embarrass the family. "We're going to Marcello's," she said dismissively. "I know you can't afford to contribute much, so just show up on time for once." Little did she know, I had a secret that would change everything. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever kept a big achievement hidden from your family. Growing up in the suburban outskirts of Boston, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our white colonial house with green shutters sat on a tree-lined street where neighbors waved to each other and kids rode bikes until streetlights came on. But inside those walls, the dynamic was anything but idyllic. My father, James, was a kind-hearted high school history teacher who loved books and baseball. He always encouraged my interests, slipping me $20 bills for cooking, magazines, and attending every school event with genuine enthusiasm. His warm brown eyes would crinkle at the corners when he tasted my early culinary experiments, even the disastrous ones. "This has potential, Becca," he'd say, forcing down my overspiced attempts at coq au vin or fallen soufflés. In stark contrast, stood my mother Diana, a real estate agent whose personal worth seemed intrinsically tied to status and appearances. She wore her success like armor: designer clothes, immaculate makeup, and a house that looked ready for a magazine shoot at a moment's notice. Her sleek bob never had a hair out of place, much like her carefully constructed image. "The Jacobsons' daughter got accepted to Harvard," she'd announce at dinner, her eyes sliding meaningfully to my community college brochures. Or, "Your cousin Melissa just bought her second investment property," when I mentioned looking for a modest apartment. Each comparison was a tiny cut, barely noticeable individually, but devastating in their accumulation. My younger brother Alex thrived under Diana's particular brand of attention. He excelled at everything naturally: sports, academics, even social skills. With his perfect grades and tennis trophies, he fulfilled Diana's vision of success without effort. I didn't resent him for it. He was a good kid who often tried to deflect Mom's criticism away from me. "Becca helped me with my science project," he'd interject when Mom started on one of her comparative tangents. But his attempts rarely diverted her for long. When I was 12, I discovered cooking. Our neighbor Mrs. Petrelli, an elderly Italian woman, would invite me over and teach me traditional recipes handed down through generations. The way she measured ingredients by feel rather than cups and spoons fascinated me. In her tiny kitchen with yellowing wallpaper and the constant aroma of simmering tomatoes, I found peace. My hands learned to knead dough until it felt just right. My nose could detect the perfect moment to add basil to a sauce, and my heart found its passion. "Cooking is nice as a hobby, Rebecca, but it's not a real career," Mom dismissed when I brought home a flyer for a summer culinary program. "Do you want to spend your life being someone's servant? You need something stable, respectable." The flyer disappeared from the refrigerator door the next day, so I learned to hide my dreams. I saved babysitting money for cooking classes, I told her were SAT prep courses. I borrowed cookbooks from the library instead of asking for them as gifts. When I won a regional cooking competition in high school, I told her it was a group project for economics class. Family celebrations always highlighted the tension. Mom insisted on orchestrating every birthday, anniversary, and holiday with precision. We always went to Marcello's Italian restaurant for special occasions, a local institution with faded red leather booths and black and white photos of Italy on the walls. The food was decent, but uninspiring, heavy on cream sauces and oversized portions. But it was expensive enough to impress Mom's friends when she mentioned it. Each year on Dad's birthday, Mom would make a production of treating everyone. "I've arranged everything," she'd announce, waving away Dad's wallet when the check came. "It's my gift." Then she'd pull out her platinum card with a flourish, making sure everyone at neighboring tables could see. Dad would just smile gratefully, his eyes sometimes catching mine in a moment of silent understanding. When I graduated from high school with no prestigious college acceptance to announce, Mom's disappointment was palpable. "Well, you can always transfer somewhere better after a year," she said, barely looking at my community college orientation packet. What she didn't know was that I had already been accepted to the Culinary Institute of Boston, with a partial scholarship. I just never told her. That pattern continued for years. I learned that sharing my goals with Mom only led to them being diminished or dismissed, so I stopped sharing altogether. Our relationship settled into a superficial exchange of pleasantries and avoided topics. Dad tried to bridge the gap, often calling me privately to check in on what was really happening in my life. "Your mother loves you, Becca," he'd say. "She just shows it in her own way." But love shouldn't make you smaller. And for years, that's how Mom's version of love felt. Like I needed to fold myself into something tiny just to be acceptable. So I built my life in spaces she couldn't reach, protected my dreams by keeping them secret, and waited for the day I might finally be enough. Little did I know that the restaurant where we celebrated every special occasion would become the stage for the biggest revelation of our family's history. My culinary education began officially the Monday after high school graduation. While my classmates celebrated with beach trips and graduation parties, I put on a white chef's coat for the first time and entered the gleaming kitchens of the Culinary Institute of Boston. The weight of student loans hung heavy. I'd only qualified for a partial scholarship, and I'd refused to ask my parents for help. Dad would have contributed if he could, but I knew money was tight with Alex heading to an expensive private university that fall. Those first months were brutal. I woke at 4:30 each morning to prep in the student kitchens, attended classes until 3, then rushed to my waitressing job at a diner where I worked until midnight. My hands developed calluses from knives and burns from hot pans. I learned to sleep sitting up on the train between commitments. But beneath the exhaustion burned a fierce joy whenever I mastered a new technique or received praise from an instructor. "Your brunoise is perfect, Thompson," Chef Marcel would grudgingly admit, examining my precisely diced vegetables. His compliments were rare and therefore treasured. I survived on coffee and determination, often going days without proper sleep. When Mom called to ask how that cooking course was going, I kept my answers vague. "It's fine, learning a lot." If she heard the passion in my voice, she might realize this wasn't just a phase. And then the questions would start, the subtle undermining, the comparisons to more practical careers. During my second year, I landed an apprenticeship at Bellini, a respected Italian restaurant downtown. The pay was barely minimum wage, but the education was priceless. That's where I met Chef Antonio Ricci, a second-generation Italian-American with a booming laugh and exacting standards. He terrified most apprentices with his explosive critiques and impossible expectations. But beneath his fierce exterior, I discovered a mentor who genuinely cared about passing on his knowledge. "You have good hands," he told me one night after service, watching me plate a delicate panna cotta. "But more important, you have good instincts. You understand flavor. It's about balance, not just recipes." Under Antonio's guidance, I worked my way up from vegetable prep to the pasta station, then finally to sous chef by my 27th birthday. I rented a tiny apartment within walking distance of the restaurant to save on transportation costs. Every spare dollar went toward paying down my student loans or into a savings account labeled someday. I told my family I was working as a food service manager, technically true but deliberately vague. When they visited my small apartment, Mom would purse her lips disapprovingly at the second-hand furniture and lack of decorative touches. "You could do so much better with this place, Rebecca," she'd say, rearranging my kitchen towels as if that would somehow transform the space. Then came the day that changed everything. Antonio called me into his office after lunch service, his usually animated face serious. "Sit down, Rebecca." He pushed aside a stack of invoices. "Marcello called me yesterday." Marcello? From Marcello's. Italian? The restaurant my family had been going to for years was owned by an old friend of Antonio's. Antonio nodded. He's retiring, wants to sell the place. His kids aren't interested in taking over. I nodded, not understanding why he was telling me this. I think you should buy it, he said simply. I laughed, then realized he wasn't joking. That's crazy. I don't have that kind of money. You have talent. You have vision. Money can be borrowed. He slid a folder across the desk. I've put together some numbers. The place needs work, but the bones are good. Location is excellent, and Marcello will sell at a fair price to the right person. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled up my bank account on my laptop. The Someday Fund had just over $35,000 after 8 years of aggressive saving. Nowhere near enough to buy a restaurant, but maybe enough for a down payment? The next morning, I called Marcello and arranged to see the restaurant's books. What I found surprised me. Beneath the dated decor and traditional menu was a business with potential. The restaurant owned its building outright, had a loyal if aging customer base, and stood in a neighborhood that was slowly becoming trendy. For weeks, I lived in a state of constant anxiety, meeting with banks, preparing business plans, and crunching numbers late into the night. Most loan officers dismissed me immediately. Too young, too inexperienced as an owner, too little collateral. But finally, First Community Bank took a chance, with Antonio co-signing the loan. The day I signed the papers, I sat in my car afterward and cried, from relief, from terror, from overwhelming responsibility. I now owned the restaurant where my family had celebrated every special occasion for the past 15 years. And none of them knew. The renovation began immediately. I closed for 2 weeks, working alongside contractors from dawn until midnight. We ripped out the tired carpet, refinished the original hardwood floors beneath, replaced the heavy red drapes with modern fixtures that let in natural light. The kitchen received a complete overhaul. New equipment, better workflow, proper ventilation. I hired new staff, but kept the longtime servers who knew the regular customers by name. The menu underwent a transformation too, still Italian, at its core but lighter, more seasonal, with local ingredients and techniques I'd learned from Antonio combined with traditional recipes from Mrs. Petrelli's kitchen. When we reopened, I positioned myself as the executive chef rather than the owner when interacting with customers. I let the staff handle front-of-house operations during the evenings when locals who might recognize me typically dined. I worked brutal hours, arriving at 6 in the morning to prep and staying until the last pot was scrubbed at night. Slowly, the changes paid off. Food critics from local papers wrote glowing reviews. Marcello's has been reborn, wrote the Boston Thai Gazette's restaurant columnist. The new chef has breathed fresh life into this neighborhood standby, honoring tradition while moving boldly forward. Business doubled within 3 months. We started requiring reservations on weekends. I hired more staff, expanded the wine list, and even began planning a small rooftop herb garden. All the while, I maintained the charade with my family. When Mom mentioned going to Marcello's for their anniversary, I made sure to be out of town, at a food conference that weekend. When she commented on the changes, I feigned mild interest. Oh, really? What's different? Even Dad, who noticed the improved quality of the pasta, never suspected his daughter was behind it. For 8 months, I lived this double life, celebrated chef and owner to my staff and customers, underachieving daughter to my family. The weight of the secret grew heavier as the restaurant's success increased. I longed to share my accomplishment with Dad, to see pride replace confusion in his eyes when he talked about my career. But the thought of Mom's reaction kept me silent. Would she find a way to diminish this too? Would she point out the risks, the debt, the potential for failure? Or worse, would she suddenly claim she'd always believed in me, rewriting our history, to cast herself as my greatest supporter? As Dad's 65th birthday approached, I knew something had to change. I was tired of hiding, tired of being less than I was to protect myself from criticism. The restaurant was thriving. The reviews were excellent. I had created something wonderful, and it was time my family knew. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning as I was reviewing produce deliveries in the restaurant's back office. Mom's name flashed on my screen, and I felt the familiar mixture of obligation and anxiety that accompanied our conversations. "Hello, Mother," I answered, deliberately using the formal address that I knew she preferred over Mom. "Rebecca, I'm planning your father's birthday dinner," she began without preamble. "It's his 65th, as you know, so I want to make sure everything is perfect." I made a non-committal sound of agreement while signing for a crate of heirloom tomatoes. "We'll be going to Marcello's on Saturday at 7, she continued, her voice taking on the crisp, organizational tone she used when orchestrating family events. "I've already made the reservation for 6 people. 6? I asked, mentally counting our immediate family members. "Yes, Alex is bringing his new girlfriend, Jasmine. She works in investment banking at Morgan Stanley." The pride in her voice was unmistakable. "Such a lovely girl, Ivy League educated. They make such a handsome couple." Of course, Alex's girlfriend would meet with immediate approval. I pushed down the familiar sting and focused on the logistics. Saturday night at Marcello's, my restaurant, with my family. The moment of truth was approaching faster than I'd anticipated. "Now, about the cost," Mom continued, her voice dropping slightly as if discussing something distasteful. "I know things have been tight for you with that food service job. Your father and I will handle the bill, of course. We just need you to confirm you'll be there." I gripped the pen in my hand so tightly it nearly snapped. After all these years, she still spoke to me as if I were financially irresponsible, rather than choosing a career path different from her expectations. "I'll be there," I said evenly. "Good. And Rebecca?" Her voice took on that familiar tone of maternal correction. "We'll be going to Marcello's. I know you can't afford to contribute much, so just show up on time for once." The words hit their target with practiced precision. Not just a comment on my finances, but also a dig at my punctuality, a quality Mom had been criticizing since my teenage years. "I understand," I replied, my voice tight. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, a strange calm settling over me. The decision I'd been wrestling with for months suddenly crystallized with perfect clarity. Saturday night would be the reveal. No more hiding, no more diminishing my accomplishments, no more accepting the role of disappointing daughter. I immediately called a staff meeting, gathering my team of servers, line cooks, and bartenders in the dining room before the lunch rush. "My family will be dining here Saturday night," I announced. "They don't know I own this place." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the group. Most of my staff knew bits and pieces of my background, but not the full story. "I want everything to be perfect," I continued. "Not just because it's my father's birthday, but because this is the night they learn the truth." My head server, Dominic, a theater major turned hospitality professional, grinned widely. "Oh, this is going to be good. When do we reveal the big secret?" We spent the next hour planning the evening down to the minute, which table they would sit at, the best one by the window but not so obvious that Mom would suspect special treatment, which servers would attend them, the most experienced who wouldn't accidentally let something slip, and exactly when and how the revelation would occur. After the main course but before dessert, I decided. Dad loves dessert, and I want him to enjoy it without the shock. My sous chef Sophia, who had become my closest friend over the past months, squeezed my shoulder supportively. "What are you going to cook for them?" That question launched us into a detailed menu planning session. Every dish needed to be significant, representing my journey and showcasing my skills without seeming like I was showing off. I decided on an amuse-bouche of arancini with the saffron risotto recipe Mrs. Petrelli had taught me as a child. The pasta course would feature my award-winning ravioli that had earned the restaurant its first critical recognition. And the main course would be Dad's favorite, osso buco, but elevated with techniques I'd learned from Antonio. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I personally selected every ingredient, tested each component of the meal, and trained the staff on exactly how the evening should unfold. Dominic suggested bringing out champagne after the main course, compliments of the owner, which would serve as the perfect segue to the revelation. Despite my outward confidence, anxiety churned beneath the surface. At night, alone in my apartment, doubts crept in. What if Mom found a way to diminish this achievement too? What if this revelation widened the rift between us rather than bridging it? What if my success actually made things worse? The night before the dinner, Sophia came over with a bottle of wine and found me obsessively reviewing the menu for the 100th time. "You need to stop," she said firmly, taking the papers from my hands. "The food will be perfect because you're an amazing chef. The service will be flawless because your staff adores you. The only variable you can't control is your family's reaction." "That's what terrifies me," I admitted, accepting the glass of wine she offered. Sophia settled onto my worn couch, tucking her feet under her. "Tell me about your dad. Will he be proud?" The question brought an immediate smile to my face. "Dad? Absolutely. He's always supported me, even when he didn't understand my choices. He used to sneak me money for cooking magazines when I was a teenager." "And your brother?" "Alex will be surprised but happy for me, I think. He's never been the problem." Sophia nodded, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "And your mother? What's the worst thing she could say?" I took a long sip of wine before answering. "She could say I've wasted my potential, that I've taken on foolish debt, that the restaurant will fail within a year." Each potential criticism felt like a weight on my chest. Or worse, she could act like she's supported me all along when we both know she hasn't. "And if she says those things, will that change what you've accomplished?" Sophia asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us. Finally, I shook my head. "No, it won't change what I've built." "Then you're ready," Sophia said simply. "No matter what happens tomorrow night, you've already won by creating something you believe in." As I fell into a restless sleep that night, I tried to hold on to that truth. The restaurant was mine. The achievement was real. And for the first time in my adult life, I was about to be fully seen by my family. For better or worse. Saturday arrived with the crisp clarity of early autumn. I woke before sunrise, my mind immediately racing with last-minute details. Though we didn't open for lunch on weekends, I arrived at the restaurant by 9, needing to occupy my hands and mind with productive tasks. The kitchen staff found me meticulously inspecting produce deliveries when they arrived at 2. "Chef, you need to go home and get ready," Sophia insisted around 4, practically pushing me toward the door. "We've got the prep under control. Your family will be here in 3 hours." Back at my apartment, I stood before my closet, suddenly aware of how few non-kitchen clothes I owned. After deliberating longer than reasonable, I selected a navy blue dress I'd bought for a food industry awards ceremony last year. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I owned, simple but elegant, with a fitted silhouette that made me feel confident. I paired it with the pearl earrings Dad had given me for my 30th birthday, my one quality piece of jewelry. As I applied makeup, another rarity in my daily life, I studied my reflection. At 32, faint lines had begun to appear at the corners of my eyes. My hands, though well manicured for the evening, bore the tiny scars and burns that marked me as a chef. I wondered if Mom would notice those details, find some way to criticize my appearance as she often did. I arrived back at the restaurant at 6:15, entering through the back door that led directly to my office. Dominic whistled appreciatively when I emerged. "Look at you, chef. All fancy without the whites. I smoothed the dress nervously. Too much? Perfect, he assured me. Sophisticated restaurateur meets loving daughter. From my office window, I could see the dining room without being visible to guests. The staff had outdone themselves. Every table dressed in crisp white linens, candles glowing warmly in the early evening light, fresh flowers arranged in simple glass vases. The restaurant had filled quickly after opening, a testament to our growing popularity. At 6:55, I spotted them through the window. Dad, still handsome at 65 with his silver hair and kind eyes, held the door for Mom. She entered with her characteristic poise, wearing an expensive-looking burgundy dress and scrutinizing the interior immediately. Alex followed, his arm around a slender woman with sleek black hair who must be Jasmine. My stomach tightened as Dominic greeted them and led them to their table, the best in the house, by the front window with a view of the small courtyard garden. "They're here," I whispered to Sophia, who had appeared at my side. "You ready?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Remember, you're the owner of this place, not the other way around," she said firmly before returning to the kitchen. I waited 5 minutes, then 10, composing myself before making my entrance. When I finally walked into the dining room, I approached their table as if I were just arriving at the restaurant. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, bending to kiss his cheek. He stood immediately, enveloping me in a warm hug that smelled of the same aftershave he'd worn my entire life. "There's my girl. Right on time." Mom's eyes flicked over my outfit, and I braced for criticism, but she merely nodded. "That's a nice dress, Rebecca. New?" "Relatively," I answered vaguely, taking the empty seat beside Alex. "Becca, this is Jasmine," Alex introduced his girlfriend, who offered a perfectly manicured hand and a practiced smile. "I've heard so much about you," she said pleasantly. "Alex says you work in the food industry?" Before I could answer, Mom interjected. "Rebecca manages a restaurant downtown. Nothing as nice as this place, of course." She gestured around at Marcello's, my restaurant, with an appreciative nod. "I must say, they've really improved things here. The decor is much more modern than it used to be." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from responding. Every paint color, every piece of artwork, every fabric had been personally selected by me during the renovation. "The menu looks different too," Dad commented, studying the leather-bound offering I'd designed. "More interesting options than I remember." "The previous owner retired," I said carefully. "I heard there's new management." Mom barely glanced at me before turning to the server who approached our table. "We'd like your best bottle of Barolo," she said decisively. "We're celebrating my husband's 65th birthday." The server, Miguel, one of my most experienced staff members, nodded professionally. "Excellent choice, ma'am. And may I suggest beginning with our chef's selection of antipasti? It's a specialty of the house." "That sounds lovely," Mom agreed, clearly pleased to be receiving attentive service. I caught Miguel's eye briefly, and he gave me an almost imperceptible wink. As the wine was poured and the first course arrived, I watched my family experience my food for the first time. Knowing it was mine, Dad closed his eyes appreciatively as he tasted the arancini. "These remind me of something," he murmured. My heart leapt. He recognized the flavors from my childhood attempts at Mrs. Petrelli's recipe. "It's just arancini, James," Mom said, dismissively, though she too took a second bite with evident enjoyment. Alex, always more observant than our mother gave him credit for, studied me curiously. "You seem different tonight, Becca. More relaxed than usual at these family dinners." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "It's a nice evening. Dad's birthday. Good food." Jasmine launched into a story about her recent business trip to Milan, and Mom listened with rapt attention, peppering her with questions about her career trajectory and family background. I recognized the pattern, the subtle interrogation, to determine if someone was worthy of approval. Jasmine's father is a federal judge, Mom mentioned pointedly during a brief lull in conversation, her eyes sliding toward me. The implication was clear. Alex had chosen well, bringing home someone with the right pedigree. When the pasta course arrived, my signature ravioli filled with butternut squash and sage in a brown butter sauce, the conversation momentarily ceased as everyone took their first bites. "This is extraordinary," Dad declared, looking genuinely surprised. "I've been coming to Marcello's for 20 years, and I've never had pasta this good here." "The new chef must be exceptional," Mom agreed, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "I wonder where they trained." I took a sip of wine to hide my smile. "The Culinary Institute of Boston has a good reputation," I offered innocently. "Well, whoever it is deserves a raise," Dad said, taking another appreciative bite. "This meal is already the best birthday present." Mom's expression flickered briefly, a hint of annoyance that Dad would suggest food could outshine her carefully planned celebration. "Speaking of presents," she said brightly, "we have something special for you after dinner, James." The main course arrived, osso buco with saffron risotto and gremolata, presented beautifully on warmed plates. Again, I watched anxiously as my family tasted my creation. "This is perfect," Dad said, looking genuinely moved. "It tastes like memories." Mom took a delicate bite and nodded approvingly. "The meat is very tender. I'll have to compliment the chef." She turned to Miguel, who had returned to check on their experience. "Everything is exceptional tonight. Please tell the chef." "I'm sure the chef will be delighted to hear that," Miguel replied, his eyes twinkling as they briefly met mine. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" "Just keep an eye on our wine," Mom instructed. "We don't want empty glasses for the toast I've planned." As the meal progressed, I felt increasingly tense, knowing the moment of revelation approached. My family continued their normal dynamic, Mom subtly controlling the conversation, Dad trying to include everyone, Alex mediating when tensions, Rose and now Jasmine observing it all with the careful attention of an outsider trying to navigate unfamiliar waters. When the plates were cleared after the main course, I nodded discreetly to Dominic across the room. It was time. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Just as Mom launched into what was clearly a rehearsed birthday toast, Dominic approached our table carrying a silver tray with flutes of champagne. The crystal glasses caught the light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the white tablecloth. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said smoothly, "but the owner would like to send over champagne in honor of the special occasion." Mom's speech faltered, her surprise evident. She recovered quickly, a pleased smile spreading across her face at this unexpected recognition. Being singled out for special treatment was exactly the sort of thing she valued. "How thoughtful," she said, clearly delighted. "Please convey our appreciation." "A Dom Perignon," Dad observed as Dominic carefully placed a flute before each of us. "That's extremely generous." Mom's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the expensive champagne. "Perhaps we should thank the owner personally," she suggested, looking around the restaurant as if expecting to spot someone important. "Are they here tonight?" Dominic maintained his professional demeanor, though I could see the gleam of anticipation in his eyes. "But you already know the owner quite well. Mrs. Thompson." Confusion flickered across their faces. Dad looked puzzled, while Mom's expression suggested she was mentally scrolling through her social connections, trying to place who among her acquaintances might own a restaurant. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken," Mom said with a polite laugh. "We don't know the owner. We've been coming here for years, but only as customers." The moment stretched between us, a thin wire of tension about to snap. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly stood up from my chair. Around us, the restaurant had grown quieter, the staff pausing in their duties. They knew what was coming. As if on cue, Sophia emerged from the kitchen, followed by line cooks and dishwashers. They lined up along the back wall of the dining room, their presence drawing the attention of other diners. "What's happening?" Alex whispered, looking between me and the assembled staff. I took a deep breath and stepped slightly away from the table. At that precise moment, Dominic raised his voice clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, a special welcome to the family of our owner and executive chef." In perfect unison, the entire staff called out, "Good evening, Chef Rebecca." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the soft hiss of candles on nearby tables, the distant clink of glasses from the bar. My family's expressions transformed in slow motion, Dad's eyes widening with dawning realization, Alex's mouth forming, a perfect O of surprise, Jasmine looking intrigued rather than shocked, and Mom's face cycled through emotions so quickly I could barely track them. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, something that looked almost like embarrassment as the implications of what she'd said earlier about not being able to afford sank in. Dad was the first to recover. He stood so abruptly his chair nearly toppled backward, his eyes shining with what I realized were tears. "Becca? This is your restaurant? You're the chef?" I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "The amazing food. You made all of it?" he continued, gesturing at our empty plates. "Every bite," Sophia confirmed from where she stood with the kitchen staff. "Chef Rebecca has transformed this place. Best boss I've ever had." Dad stepped around the table and pulled me into a fierce hug. "I am so proud of you," he whispered against my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "So incredibly proud." When he released me, Alex was on his feet too, his expression a mixture of shock and admiration. "Holy shit, Becca," he said, then glanced apologetically at Mom for his language. "This whole time? How long have you owned this place?" 8 months, I admitted. "I bought it when Marcello retired." "That's why the food improved so dramatically," Dad said, the pieces falling into place. "The new menu, the renovations. It was all you." The other diners had begun to catch on to the drama unfolding, and a smattering of applause broke out around the restaurant. Many of our regular customers knew me, had watched the transformation of Marcello's under my ownership. "To Chef Rebecca," called an elderly gentleman from a nearby table, raising his glass. He and his wife had been coming every Friday night since we reopened. More voices joined in, glasses raising throughout the dining room. "To Chef Rebecca!" The spontaneous toast broke the tension, sending a wave of warmth through the room. My staff beamed proudly, and even Jasmine lifted her glass with a genuinely impressed smile. Only Mom remained seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. When the applause died down and conversations resumed around us, she finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "Why would you keep this from us?" she asked quietly. The question hung between us, loaded with years of complicated history. This was the moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading, the confrontation that would either heal our relationship or fracture it beyond repair. I gestured to Dominic to give us privacy, and he smoothly directed the staff back to their duties. Dad and Alex reluctantly returned to their seats, the celebration dampened by Mom's rigid posture and tight expression. "I think," I said carefully, "that's a conversation we should have privately after dinner." For once, Mom didn't press the issue. She lifted her champagne with a slightly trembling hand and took a sip, her eyes never leaving my face. The silent assessment continued as dessert was served, a trio of traditional Italian sweets I'd prepared specially for Dad, including the cannoli recipe that had won my first cooking competition. Dad ate with genuine enjoyment, repeatedly expressing his amazement and pride between bites. Alex peppered me with questions about how I'd managed to keep such a huge secret. Jasmine, to her credit, engaged enthusiastically, seeming genuinely interested in the restaurant business. Throughout it all, Mom remained unnaturally quiet, watching, listening, her champagne barely touched. The tension between us was a living thing, waiting for the moment when it would finally break free. After dessert, I invited my family to join me in the private dining room upstairs. The small, elegant space overlooked the main restaurant floor and served as both a VIP dining area and my unofficial office when I needed to escape the kitchen, but remain close by. Dad entered with undisguised admiration, touching the antique wooden beams I'd preserved during renovation, and admiring the vintage maps of Italy I'd framed on the walls. Alex and Jasmine settled onto the small leather sofa by the window, while Mom chose a straight-backed chair near the door, as if planning a quick escape. I asked Dominic to bring coffee, I said, trying to sound casual as I closed the door behind us. The soft click of the latch felt oddly final. For a moment, no one spoke. The muffled sounds of the restaurant below, conversation, laughter, the gentle clink of silverware, created a backdrop to our family tableau. Mom broke the silence first, her voice controlled but with an undercurrent of hurt. "Why would you keep this from us? Your own family?" The question I'd been dreading. I took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. "Would you have supported me if I'd told you I was taking out a massive loan to buy a restaurant?" "That's not fair, Rebecca," she said, color rising in her cheeks. "Of course we would have supported you." "Would you?" I challenged gently. "The way you supported me when I wanted to go to culinary school, or when I chose to work as a line cook instead of finding an office job?" Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "I wanted what was best for you." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You wanted what you thought was best for me, what fit your vision of success. Every time I showed interest in cooking, you dismissed it. Every achievement I earned in the culinary world, you minimized." "I was trying to protect you," she insisted. "The restaurant industry is brutal. The failure rate for new restaurants is astronomical. I didn't want to see you disappointed." "It wasn't your job to prevent me from being disappointed," I said, feeling years of pent-up frustration finally finding voice. "It was your job to support me when I was, and celebrate with me when I wasn't." Dad cleared his throat gently. "Diana, Becca's right. We should have supported her dreams, even if they weren't the ones we would have chosen." Mom turned to him, betrayal evident in her expression. "You knew about this?" "No," he admitted. "I didn't know about the restaurant, but I've always known Becca would succeed at whatever she put her mind to. She has your determination after all." The comparison to Mom seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked rapidly, her perfectly maintained composure beginning to crack. Alex leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mom, do you remember when I wanted to quit the tennis team in high school? You told me I had to stick with it because I'd made a commitment." Mom nodded cautiously, clearly unsure where he was going with this. "Well, Becca made a commitment to cooking when she was just a kid, and she stuck with it, even when it was hard. Even when her own family—" He hesitated, then continued. "Even when we didn't fully support her." "I supported her," Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, you tolerated my choice while constantly suggesting alternatives," I corrected. "There's a difference." The door opened, and Dominic entered with a tray of coffee and small dessert liqueurs. He set it on the table with a sympathetic glance in my direction before discreetly withdrawing. Mom reached for a coffee cup, her hands not quite steady. "I always wanted you to be secure, to be respected," she said after taking a careful sip. "I worried about you struggling financially in a difficult industry. Yet here I am, owning the very restaurant where you've been celebrating special occasions for years," I pointed out. "Doesn't that suggest I might know what I'm doing?" Tense silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Mom's eyes filled with tears. In all my preparations for this confrontation, I hadn't anticipated that reaction. Diana Thompson did not cry in public, or in private, as far as I knew. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely audible. I was wrong about you, Rebecca. The simple admission stunned me into silence. I didn't understand your passion because it wasn't something I had ever experienced, she continued, carefully dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. My own mother stressed security above all else. Find a respectable career, marry well, build a life that looks good from the outside. It was the most personal revelation Mom had ever shared with me. I had never considered that her critical nature might be an inheritance rather than an innate trait. When you showed interest in cooking, all I could see were the risks, she admitted. The financial insecurity, the long hours, the physical toll. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you toward something safer. I didn't need protection, I said softly. I needed belief. Dad reached across the table and took Mom's hand. Diana, look at what our daughter has created. She's extraordinary. And she did it all without our help, which is both impressive and a little heartbreaking. Mom nodded slowly. I've always been afraid of failure, she confessed. My own, and, by extension, yours. It was easier to discourage you from trying than to watch you possibly fail. But that's the thing, Mom, I said, feeling a strange lightness as years of resentment began to dissolve. Failure is part of success. I've failed countless times in the kitchen. Dishes that didn't work. Techniques I couldn't master on the first. Try. Even now, I make mistakes. But I learn from them. Would you... Mom hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic hesitancy. Would you show us your kitchen? The request surprised me. In all our years of tension, I'd never imagined my mother would take interest in my professional domain. I'd love to, I replied. As we descended the stairs to the main floor, Alex fell in step beside me. For what it's worth, he murmured. I always knew you were the talented one in the family. You were pretty good at tennis, I teased. He shook his head. I was adequate at a lot of things. You're exceptional at what you love. There's a difference. The kitchen was still in full service mode when we entered through the swinging doors. Line cooks called out orders. Plates were being artfully arranged, and the controlled chaos of a professional kitchen at peak performance surrounded us. This is where the magic happens, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice as I guided my family through the space. To my surprise, Mom asked thoughtful questions about equipment and workflow. Dad beamed as I introduced my staff, who shared stories about working with me, some funny, some touching in their sincerity. Chef saved this place. Jorge, my pastry chef, told them earnestly. The old Marcello's was dying. She breathed new life into it. She's tough but fair, added Miguel. First boss I've had who makes me want to be better. As we completed the tour and returned to the dining room, I realized the evening had transformed into something I never could have anticipated. Not a perfect resolution. Decades of miscommunication couldn't be fixed in a single night. But the beginning of something new. Mom paused before we rejoined the other diners. I'm sorry, Rebecca, she said simply. I'm sorry I didn't see you clearly. I'm sorry too, I admitted, for keeping this from you, for not giving you the chance to be proud of me. I am proud, she said, and for once, I believed her. It may take me time to show it properly, but I am very proud of what you've built. Dad wrapped an arm around each of us. My two stubborn, brilliant women, he said affectionately. Best birthday present ever, seeing you both finally truly talking to each other. As we made our way back to the table, I felt as though a weight had lifted. The restaurant continued to buzz around us, servers moving efficiently between tables, guests enjoying their meals, all of it running smoothly because of systems I had created, food I had developed, a vision I had brought to life, and for the first time, my family could see it too. 6 months after Dad's birthday revelation, we gathered at Marcello's again, this time for a Sunday brunch that had become our new family tradition. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows, illuminating the fresh flowers on each table, and catching the edges of the water glasses, sending prisms dancing across white tablecloths. The changes in our family dynamic were subtle, but significant. Dad entered the restaurant with the same proud smile he'd worn every time since discovering it was mine, greeting the staff by name and asking about their families. Alex and Jasmine, now engaged, brought along design magazines to discuss wedding venues, comfortable enough in my space to spread them across the table between coffee cups. The most profound transformation, however, was in my relationship with Mom. She arrived carrying a small potted herb plant, basil, my favorite, and set it on the table with a slightly self-conscious smile. "For your kitchen garden," she explained. "The nursery said this variety has the best flavor for cooking." The fact that she had consulted with someone, had taken the time to learn which variety would be best for culinary purposes, spoke volumes about her efforts to engage with my world. "Perfect timing," I replied, genuinely touched. "We're expanding the rooftop garden next week." After brunch was served, I invited Mom to join me in the kitchen. 6 months ago, such an invitation would have been unimaginable. Now she followed me with genuine interest, washing her hands at the station I indicated and accepting the apron I offered. "I thought we could make Dad's favorite cannoli together," I suggested, "for his half-birthday." A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Half-birthday, is that a thing now?" "It is when you own a restaurant and can declare special occasions whenever you want," I replied lightly. Working side by side with my mother in my professional kitchen felt surreal. Her movements were precise and methodical as she followed my instructions for the pastry dough, asking thoughtful questions about technique. I found myself noticing similarities I'd never acknowledged before. The way we both tilted our heads when concentrating, our shared tendency to hum softly while working. "You know," Mom said as she carefully rolled the dough to the exact thickness I'd specified, "I always enjoyed cooking before I had children." This was news to me. "Really? I never saw you cook much growing up." She nodded, a faraway look in her eyes. My mother discouraged it as a waste of time. "Why cook when you can afford to eat out?" she'd say. So I stopped, except for holidays. It seemed more appropriate to focus on other things. The revelation shifted something in my understanding of her. How many of her reactions to my choices had been shaped by her own mother's disapproval? The thought was both saddening and strangely comforting. The realization that her criticism hadn't been born from disappointment in me specifically, but from patterns established long before I was born. When we returned to the dining room with the freshly filled cannoli, Dad's face lit up. "My 2 favorite chefs," he declared, accepting the plate with exaggerated reverence. "Don't get carried away, James," Mom said, but her tone was warm and she didn't object when he pulled out his phone to take a picture of us together, flour still dusting our aprons. In the months since the reveal, my business had continued to thrive. A glowing review in a national food magazine had brought customers from beyond our local area. We'd expanded our hours to include Sunday brunch after multiple requests. I'd even been approached about writing a cookbook, a project I was considering with cautious excitement. But the greatest growth had been personal rather than professional. The weight of hiding my success had been heavier than I realized. Now, being fully seen and increasingly accepted by my family brought a sense of wholeness I hadn't known I was missing. That's not to say everything was perfect. Mom still occasionally made comments that stung, old habits reasserting themselves in moments of stress. I still sometimes withdrew rather than engaging directly when tensions rose. We were works in progress, learning new ways to interact after decades of established patterns. The difference was that now we were both trying. She made efforts to understand my world, and I made efforts to see beyond the critical parent to the complex woman who had her own insecurities and disappointments. After brunch, as Alex and Jasmine discussed wedding details with Dad, Mom, and I took our coffee to the small courtyard garden at the back of the restaurant. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, carefully stirring her coffee. "About how I never supported your dreams because I was afraid you'd fail." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "My mother was the same way with me," she admitted. "Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. I always thought I was protecting you from disappointment, but maybe I was just repeating what I knew." "We often do," I said gently. She looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time. "You broke the pattern, though. Despite everything, you pursued what you loved. That takes courage." "Or stubbornness," I suggested with a small smile. "That too," she agreed, returning the smile. "You come by it honestly." As we sat in companionable silence, I reflected on how keeping my success secret had both protected and hurt me. Protection from potential criticism had come at the cost of authentic connection. I'd built walls so high that even genuine praise couldn't easily scale them. The restaurant had taught me to be vulnerable in ways I never expected. Every dish I sent out was an expression of myself, open to judgment. Every service was a risk, a possibility of failure or success. Learning to accept both with equanimity had made me stronger in the kitchen, and now it was making me stronger, in my personal relationships too. Dad joined us in the garden, settling into a chair with a contented sigh. "Best half-birthday ever," he declared, patting his stomach appreciatively. "Next year for your real birthday, we should do something special," I suggested. "Maybe a private dinner in the kitchen. You could invite some friends." His eyes lit up at the idea. "I'd like that, though nothing could top last year's surprise." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand briefly, a rare gesture of physical affection from her. "I'm proud of what you've built here, Rebecca," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." The simple words, delivered without qualification or suggestion for improvement, meant more than elaborate praise would have. They represented not just acceptance of my achievement, but acknowledgement of her own past failure to support it. "Thank you," I replied simply, returning the squeeze. Later that evening, after my family had departed and the restaurant was closed, I sat at the bar with Sophia, sharing a glass of wine as we often did after Sunday service. "Your mom seems different," she observed. "Less intimidating." I laughed. "She's still plenty intimidating, but yes, she's trying. We both are." "And how does it feel, having everything out in the open?" I considered the question carefully. "Lighter," I finally said. "Like I've been carrying this heavy secret for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to have that weight." Sophia nodded understandingly. "You know what they say. We're only as sick as our secrets." "I don't think my secret was sick exactly," I mused. "It was protective, but protection can become a prison if you're not careful." As I looked around, the restaurant, my restaurant, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the opportunity to create something meaningful, for the staff who had become a second family, for the slow healing of my first family, and for the courage to finally step fully into my own life, visible and vulnerable with all the risks and rewards that entailed. The following year, as promised, we held a special dinner for Dad's 66th birthday. He invited his closest friends, and I prepared a menu that told the story of our family through food, dishes that represented significant moments and memories. Mom helped with the preparations, her skills in the kitchen improving with practice and genuine interest. As I watched my father blow out the candles on his cake, surrounded by people who loved him, I realized that success meant something different than I'd once thought. It wasn't just about professional achievement or financial security. It was about building a life where you could be authentically yourself and connect genuinely with others. My restaurant had given me that gift, not just a showcase for my culinary talents, but a space where truth could finally emerge, where relationships could heal, and where the best version of myself could flourish. What secrets are you keeping from your loved ones? Sometimes the things we hide to protect ourselves actually prevent the deepest connections we long for. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, being seen for who you truly are, with all your accomplishments and flaws, is the greatest gift you can give yourself and those who love you. Thank you for joining me on this journey of revelation and healing.